Okay, here we go. Everything's live. So don't say anything embarrassing. All right. Thank you very much, Erica. So let's go ahead and just start with the quick synopsis. I kind of got one here in my instructions that I'll just read real quick. But basically, the coach of the Army team at the military academy was faced with the dilemma about how to foster team performance. He used the objective data on individual performance to select his varsity and junior varsity teams. Um, but when the two crews raced one another at practice, the JV crew beat the varsity crew by about two-thirds of the time. So in the case, we see the coach attempts to determine what the causes are for the results, and by the end of the season, the varsity was still there's kind of in that downward spiral and not performing and getting beat by the junior varsity, and so now they have just 1 week before the season-ending nationals race, and now coach has to decide what action to take to help the varsity crew's members pull together to reach their potential as a team. So, just wanted to ask. I picked from a few questions here that they provided, and basically, well, the first issue is what is the issue? I'll just kind of open that up to you guys. What do you think? I mean, what's the biggest issue?
I'm going to say full disclosure. I've done this case study before for a previous class, so actually I know how it ends.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was reading it, I was like, "Hooray! I already know how to do this one." Um, well, the issue is that the coach has used a proven method to determine who needs to go on which team, right? Because the method he used went into a lot of detail on what the method was and why he had to use it, and so he used a proven method, but the results of the method are not correct. Do you know what I mean? He did all this work, all that, and now it doesn't work. So I think what the main issue is he needs to find out why it doesn't work, because how is he going to pick his teams from here on out if the method that he uses is apparently flawed? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And obviously, in the case study, you see that there was a lot of research and a lot of people put time into developing these methods and these tests and measurements. But yeah, it didn't work out for him, and so he can't repeat that again.
So the biggest issue that I saw in the case was psychological limitations.
Yeah.
I said that that's what he needs to focus on. How can he, get in the head of the boys and understand what they're thinking, as well as be able to help them get past the mental game, I guess. That's kind of what I talked about.
Yeah, that's what I kind of brought up too in my synopsis, was that a lot of it was things that are harder to measure. He was obviously taking a very heavy data-driven approach, but yeah, I agree. It was a lot of psychological stuff. Kind of the next question, it kind of helps lead into the next question, which is, what are the specific behaviors, actions, and results that raise concern? That's the next question they have here that I wanted to ask you guys. So
Say that again.
what are the specific behaviors, actions, and results that raise concern? Seems kind of...
They don't talk to each other. Like, they don't treat each other as teammates.
Yeah.
They didn't have a team mentality. Like at the end when they were talking, it's like I did this or you did this. And it was talking about when the junior varsity would talk to each other, it was like, as a team we need to do this. And the varsity was more of you, me, instead of as a team.
Yeah. Well, and even I thought it was interesting at the very end, after they kind of have that regroup, near the end of the case study. And then it says after they were done, they all went their separate ways. They went in 8 different directions. They dropped some hints as to the behavior that's concerning, and I mean there's a lot of signs that point to they are just not unified at all. Are there any other specific behaviors, actions, or results that you guys noticed?
Is my mic working by chance?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say, the case mentions that a lot of time the boats run slower if the crew members aren't like rowing in sync, and so the synergy is actually probably a bigger problem than maybe like being strong enough to like row the boats and stuff. It's slowing it down more than not having the strength to do that. I think so. That's probably something.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think synergy is not a word we would use to describe the varsity team. And,
Yes. The other thing I was going to say is I think there's a lot of jockeying for positions. Kind of, it's the same point that we've already made about being not playing as a team, but it seemed like they were more concerned about who was in what seat and which guy was rowing the hardest, and that, kind of like Austin said, worked negatively for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and we keep kind of bringing this idea up of this, their mentality or this psychology, but they really were, it just seems like inwardly focused, and they weren't thinking as a team at all. And so I think that was a big thing.
I thought that there didn't seem to be any leaders. It said that the person that sits in the 6th seat was the captain in the 6th position on the rowboat, but you never heard anything about the captain getting the guys together or the captain trying to do anything like that. So
Yeah.
I don't know what happened with the leadership in that boat.
Yeah, it was kind of like a free-for-all. I agree with that.
Yeah, one of my suggestions was that the coach should highlight, try and pick out whatever teammate he felt like was in the best position to lead and that was most likely to be able to fill that role, and take him aside and kind of help him see what the coach is seeing and see if he can inspire him to step up to the plate to become the leader, basically. Yeah, that's something I suggested.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's similar to a suggestion that I made too.
I got a question about the whole boat thing. It says that there's the 8 guys rowing, and then there's the coxswain. So is there 9 people in the boat, or is there just 8?
I thought there was just 8, but
Because the coxswain doesn't row, right?
The coxswain does row. He just he's like although it in some crew teams I don't think the coxswain rows, but I think in this case there's the guy does row, but he just kind of yells they yell they say stroke, so everybody knows when they're supposed to do it. Because on these there's at least as far as I know there's 8. But I was gonna say one of the other issues they have I think on the varsity boat is that each team member feels that they are the only team member that's actually trying. Do you know what I mean? You could kind of see it at that last meeting they had where it's they're all strong, but they all assume that they're the only one that's actually putting any effort in, and then everybody else is just kind of floating along. So you have that. You don't have that mentality because everybody thinks that they're the only one that's actually doing anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was really fun. I remember it mentions also in the case study the JV team, their team chant, when they put their hands together was nothing to lose, right? And I think that mentality too plays in to a lot of that because they weren't so focused on. They weren't really stressing themselves out over the competition of it all. They were just they were just passionate and just doing it. And I think that nothing to lose mentality also helped them, and they were just much more in sync and in it for the joy. It seems like the varsity team, they weren't enjoying it at all. They're kind of just um, so caught up in their individual performance and the whole competition aspect of it. It mentions that as well, that one of the crew members blamed the excessive competition as to their performance issues, and that there was so much emphasis on that competition and putting them against the JV team that it caused problems too. So I thought that was interesting. But why don't we let's kind of go to the next section here. It says data and performance is the next. That's the questions. The first question is, does Coach P have the right measures in place? We kind of talked about that a lot already, but did you guys have any other thoughts about that question? Does Coach P have the right measures in place? What do you think?
That's one of the things that I wrote on mine, was that when he's doing the initial recruiting, he's not checking attitudes and he's not checking how well they work with other people. He was mainly doing the strength and who's the fastest and stuff like that. So I think he might want to put that on his checklist on the next recruiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. His physical guidelines work great. He's got a good system to identify who the strongest are and the most physically fit, and who has the best technique and that sort of thing, but not leadership skills or the ability to push the team or to drive them.
Yeah.
Well, there's one thing, it doesn't mention it in there, but I think part of his problem is that he is going in under the assumption that all of them have some degree of leadership trait because they're at a military academy. You know what I mean? The whole point of the military academy is to teach people leadership. So I think it doesn't say it in there, but at least in my mind, I would think that he's going in there with an assumption that he doesn't have to worry about somebody wanting to be a leader or people knowing how to work as a team, because these guys, some of them had been at the military academy for 4 years. I mean, when they graduate, they're going to become an officer in the United States Army. I think he just assumes that they have some of these skills that they're lacking, because, I mean, if they can't work in an 8-man team, they don't, then they have leadership problems. So I think, for me, that's kind of an unwritten problem, but it's a problem that they have there, that the coach has to go in with these assumptions in place, thinking all I have to worry about is getting the physically strongest one, and all of this other stuff will fall into place.
Yeah.
Another thing with the military thing, it said one of the guys said he felt he was ineffective in influencing the more senior members of the team who outranked him militarily. So, I mean, there's that whole military mindset. I don't know if you've ever been on a base or whatever, where, I mean, you're taught the whole time not to talk a certain way to certain superiors, and then all of a sudden you're on a team with them and you have to tell them what they're doing wrong, and it just creates more tension.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of their issues, kind of like what we talked about, was, I mean, obviously a lack of teamwork, but yeah, that ranking issue, I think, could play a lot into that, of them, getting caught up in the comparison and the hierarchy. I think, which is still kind of a leadership issue, like you mentioned earlier. So, what measures should be added? Again, I apologize that some of these seem kind of redundant because we're kind of answering them as we go along with other questions. But yeah, the next one is, what measures should be added? Maybe,
I think one of the things that I talked about was maybe like team building exercises, because I know a lot of times, like with different works or different like councils that I've been on for school and stuff, they always do like a retreat where they just send everyone up like away for a weekend or whatever, and they do all these exercises to help build that synergy. So that was one of the things I suggested, was maybe that the coach find some kind of activities, and I'm sure there's plenty of information out there for different activities and what you can do to kind of help build that teamwork and, you know, kind of pull out the leaders and follower and different crew members.
Yeah, I actually wrote down that very suggestion in my case study analysis as well. Is that team building would be, I think, a kind of a last ditch effort. You know, at this point they're a week out, but that could pay dividends if he. Well, and at that point it'd be really hard. But yeah, I agree. The team building is an important thing that they should consider. As far as measures for data and performance, you know, we kind of talked about this idea of attitude being a problem and maybe this kind of hierarchy thing. But you guys think there's any measures that could be added to kind of gauge that? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll just say keep the focus on fun. You know that teams tend to do better when their morale is up, when they're actually having a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And you know, it's funny because I found myself really focusing on the crew members and the rowing team for a lot of it. But you know, near the end, I kind of started asking myself, well, you know, the coach, he's kind of setting the tone. And I agree. I mean, what kind of tone was he setting? Because it certainly didn't sound like fun, you know, like you said. But yeah, I think that's a good one. And kind of another thing. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. But my wife actually just had a job interview, and they called her back, and they said that everybody just loved her, and it was really good. But the guy that was interviewing her is at a dentist's office, and he said, we can train any, you know, sufficiently smart person the procedures, you know, and the technique or whatever. But you can't. It's a lot harder to teach, you know, the soft skills and the personality and the, you know, that brightness and the friendly and the warm. So I think those are things and measures. I know it's easy to say, probably a lot harder to actually measure, but if there was some way to kind of gauge the personal attitude, the team unity, you know, and I mean, those are things that people look for in job interviews. I think that'd be something and a measure that Coach P could add in the future, you know, when he's assembling his teams and looking at those.
Well, I think he could even add just something as simple as some kind of um, social activity for all of them together, but don't let them know that he's watching them, but watch them as they interact together to see. Because if you just put them in some kind of basic social setting, you'll see, like, anyone, he has a degree in psychology, so you'd think he'd be able to see it.
Yeah.
He'd be able to see who are the natural leaders, who are the followers, who are the ones that are a little bit more stubborn than the other ones. You know what I mean? I think he needed to kind of look at them outside of just the rowing aspect, but in like a social aspect to see how their attitudes compare that way.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that could be a great not a weird way to go about making those observations. I think that's a great idea. So some of these questions are kind of weird. Hang on, let me read this one. Yeah, we've already kind of answered that one, but why would the data suggest performance yet not match the actual result of the collective team? Pretty easy answer, I guess. But
Let me tell you something. When I was in high school, we were on an all-star soccer team, and we were playing up against the number one in the state, and everybody was all gung-ho until the team made their first goal against us. And then all of a sudden the team just turned on each other, and they were just, I don't know if y'all have ever played with girls in the first place, but it's a mess. I would never do it again. But they were, it's like they were totally different people just because somebody beat them. And I think that's kind of how these guys were. They started out by saying, we should have beat the JV better than we already did right after the recruitment. And that's kind of where the coach should have been like, listen, guys, this is just the beginning. You're going to get better as a team. Instead, he just let it ride, and I think that hurt him more than anything.
Yeah.
One of the problems that I said was that the coach shouldn't have waited till the end of the season to have a meeting with the varsity. I mean, at least like halfway through the season, he should have been able to see, look, there's a pattern here, and because it said that a lot of the players were sending him emails and not talking to each other, and I feel like that should have been one of the first signs that he needed to kind of force a conversation.
Yep, I think that's a great point.
Well, and I think another issue is being physically fit means that you work out a lot, and working out a lot is an individual effort. Do you know what I mean? And so all of these guys are spending the off season making themselves the best that they can be, and so I think they kind of get stuck in that I'm the best mentality. You know what I mean? So he needs to find a way to transition them from that I'm making myself better to I'm making the team better. So that might be part of the issue too.
Yeah.
One of the things the case said, in addition to that, was that it said if somebody makes a mistake, as soon as the others try and fix it for them, it amplifies the mistake instead of being patient and letting that person fix it themselves and get back in sync. I think it kind of goes back with what all we were saying. These guys they're all trying to be the number one rower on the boat, so when they feel an issue, they feel the need to step up and make up the difference instead of just being patient and saying, they'll fix it out, they'll figure it out and fix it. So that's something else that I saw.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys are seeing John's comment here. He said, I think that one of the biggest issues is communication. No one has talked to anyone about anything, and as we have said, it is very hard to communicate issues if there's no way to talk to each other. Also a very good point. Thanks, John. So just kind of, I guess, moving into the meat here, the final strategy portion. This is, kind of what are the recommendations that you guys wrote down. So what changes, if any, should Coach P take to rectify the situation for the upcoming finals? So they only got a week left, but what were some of the other things that you guys mentioned as solutions?
One of mine, I talked about being on a soccer team. Whenever we got really upset with each other, we didn't play soccer anymore. We put the ball away and we all played rugby. And then depending on the weather, I remember one time it just turned into a big mud fight and we all were just wrestling with each other. And then when we got done, there was no tension and everybody was having fun and we played better than we did before. So that was my suggestion, was that do something different than rowing.
Yeah.
Have a competition, something other than rowing.
Yep. It's a great suggestion.
So I talked to my dad, and he's been coaching fast pitch and other sports for about 13 years. And I told him the suggestions, and I asked his opinion. And so just going through them, he said moving JV up to varsity is just bad because there's a reason they're on JV. What he suggested is actually take like 5 players from the JV and put them up with the varsity and basically go through another like mini tryout. Obviously not as extensive as the first one, but just tell them there's 10 spots available, 8 for the starting position and 2 backup. You're all going to be competing for them, and whichever 8 work the best and work best as a team as do well, you're going to be starting on varsity as finals, and the others will move down. It makes everyone work for them and kind of forces teamwork in a way.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to this idea that we've mentioned already, but just clearly you got to switch it up, and I think he's not going to get the success by doing it the way that he's been doing it, and I can't think of. I mean, that's a really good way to switch it up, is to actually kind of mix up the teams a bit and bring some of those JV up, and then kind of mix and mingle and see from there. What else did you guys come up with as recommendations?
Well, mine's kind of along the lines of Erica's, but mine's based on that just because I was in the Marines for 5 years, and so I know kind of that military mentality. And nothing brings you together more than, first of all, shared misery, but second is beating each other. So I think they need to have something where they actually can get physical with each other. Like he needs to put them in a room with boxing gloves or wrestling mats or something. Like they need to go do their hand-to-hand combat training together, run the O course, something like that. Because I know for me, in my experience with those things, when you get a team that gets like nitpicky and nasty with each other, the only way to fix it real fast is get them to beat on each other. And after they beat on each other, usually it works itself out. It's just one of those magical things.
Does that work for kids too?
Yeah,
I
with
wish.
our siblings.
It did in my family. We had a set of boxing gloves that got well overused.
That's awesome. Cool. Yeah, that is that's a good one, and I think your background and speaking specifically to the culture and dynamic there is good. Anybody else? Is there anything else you guys came up with?
I think the only other thing that I said, and we've already talked about it, which is kind of why I've been quiet, but I said he needs to just talk to him and explain to him that the reason that the JV's beating him is because they're working together smoothly and the varsity is fighting each other. They're trying to overcompensate for each other, and they're just, they don't trust each other, basically. So after he can get the tension down, if he can help them recognize that they don't just trust each other and just row smooth and do your best, and trust the next guy will fix whatever he needs to. That's what I suggested.
Yeah. I think as I've been reading, I've been loving that book, The Speed of Trust. I don't know if it's just me, but I've just been reading that thing. I'm way ahead because I can't put it down, but I think also this whole idea of trust that is talked about. There's really no trust on the varsity team, and I think a great way to really establish trust is open communication and transparency. Kind of like he talks about in early on in that book, he mentions that experience where they have the merger between the two companies, and there's just tons of problems. But it wasn't until there was that like 1 or 2 day retreat, and he just said, you know what, we're just gonna, if you want, we can just skip everything we had planned and just have an open, candid feedback session. And then because of that, because of his openness and his humility, it turned things around. And I think, so far Coach P's done a good job at passing the blame onto the team members, but I think really to build that trust, it could be really beneficial just to have an open feedback session, and maybe in more of a verbal sense, slug it out, and just kind of, just kind of get, let them vent, let them get their frustrations out. But then once they do, to just kind of establish that, okay, now what kind of mentality, and really just show some humility and trust, and just be real about the situation and say, look, this isn't working, get it out of your system. And maybe that was another thing is, I think there's a lot of hidden like data points. There may be a lot of things that Coach P's not even aware of, that are going on. Maybe he doesn't have all the data points on the table he needs to actually make meaningful decision and progress. And so that was one of my suggestions, was just to have an open feedback session with the team, and just give appreciative feedback, but then also give constructive feedback, and just really open it up. I put in there in my case analysis that Roger Connors, he's the CEO and founder of Partners in Leadership, and he wrote a really good book about accountability. And he says, he calls them accountability conversations, and he just says, these accountability conversations are the first step to changing the course of unmet expectations. So I just think there needs to be more accountability and open communication to kind of establish that trust and make progress. So anyway, I've been talking a lot, but are there any other thoughts from you guys about how to move forward or how to rectify the situation?
I was going to say, when you were talking about that trust thing, something had occurred to me. When he was telling them all to email him, right, because he said, email me your problems,
Mm-hmm.
each team member knew that they were emailing the coach to complain about the other team members.
Yeah.
So they all knew, like, it occurred to me when you were saying that there was no trust there. He had actually probably, by having them email him, he had probably created less trust in the team, because then everybody knows you're emailing the coach to complain about everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that probably just built a worse. That probably made the problem worse than, just like you said, just kind of putting it all out in the open, trying to keep it all. Oh well, nobody's going to deal with this. If you guys have problems with other teammates, just email me. Well, they all know they're emailing them, and they all know that they're saying horrible things about each other.
Yeah.
Behind their backs, so that's gonna create a worse problem.
That's a good point. I think sometimes, if they knew that, they may feel the pressure to manufacture issues that they didn't really feel were an issue, but to push something out there so they weren't the only one getting bashed, and make sure that they at least got their saying and looked the best. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Whether he intended to or not, he was kind of cultivating that mistrust or that distrust in the team. I hadn't thought about that. So, yeah, I think other than some team building exercises that he could do to kind of, in a last ditch effort to get them to bond and show some teamwork. And it took took longer than a week. We've all seen Remember the Titans, in that situation. But I think, I think that was about all the feedback that I came up with that we've touched on. Well, in conclusion here, I don't know if we get docked for not using the whole hour, but we went 40 minutes. Is that good enough?
I was gonna say, do you guys want to know how I fixed it in the real world? Because I in the last time I did this case study, we had to find out how he actually fixed it. Do you want to know how he fixed it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He took them all into a room, and one at a time, he made all of them wrestle each other to exhaustion. And then after they were all done and they were all on the ground and everybody had spent everything, he asked them if he thought that everybody had given their all in the wrestling, and they were able to then kind of see that each one of them was actually very strong, and each one of them actually was trying very hard, and they ended up he ended up keeping the varsity team the same, and they I don't think they won, or it wasn't some like storybook ending, but they did actually start beating the JV team consistently, and they didn't do too badly in nationals. So it was kind of he stuck him in a room and he made them beat each other up for like a couple of hours.
All right, that's cool. Well, I'm glad you shared that, because it actually says here. It says to research the case and share with the group how things turned out, and I was looking everywhere and I couldn't see anywhere where it said that without charging me money. So thanks for sharing.
Hey, I got a question real quick.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you're married. Okay, do y'all ever have just like wrestle sessions with your spouse, like to beat off frustration? Not the other kind of wrestle, but just like wrestles?
I haven't.
I tried that once, but she fights dirty, so.
My wife and I do, and it seems to help. She's fiery and likes wrestling. It works for both of us. So
I know it clears a lot of muddy water if you ever get in an argument. Just knock down, drag out.
All right, that's good. I've only been married for 5 months, so I'll tuck that away as in the maybe I'll need it someday file cabinet. But that's really good. Okay, did you guys have any other thoughts or comments? I think just to kind of conclude, seems like going back, we have this issue, but kind of to summarize the points that we brought up in our discussion, should have paid more attention to psychological factors early on, and should have measured the group's effectiveness as well earlier on. I think also, kind of based on our comments, should have been more aware of group conflicts and intervened with more proactively with these team building kind of exercises or these wrestling matches, and just to really get some more strategy going there. But yeah, that was a very good discussion, a very fun case study, and yeah, I hope I did an okay job at leading the group. But I think also, I guess just my last thought here is, it says here in the prompts as well that, consider taking note of these concepts and applying them in your family, which I thought was kind of neat. Make sure that you're aware of the group dynamic and using the gospel to build unity and to overcome some of that. So I thought that was noteworthy. But other than that, thank you all very much for joining.
Great job.
Time. Next week, same time, same channel. We'll be back at it. So thank you all very much.
The leader is for next week.
John has it for next week.
You good for next week, John? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. I guess your mic's not working. But well, if you have any questions, you can email anyone that's been led the discussion, and if you need any help kind of getting that set up or whatever. I want to thank Erica and Brian for keeping on me and making sure that I had everything taken care of. Okay, John's saying he thought he was week 6, not week 4. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but
Next week is week 6.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, there it is. Yeah, so yeah, next week is because this was lesson 5, so lesson 6 is next week, so that'll be you. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and have a great evening.
See you later.
Yeah.